So in Photoshop, when we look at an image, the first thing we would want to know about the image is how big it is. What are the specifications for this image? So we go to image in Photoshop, I'm in Photoshop, image, and go to image size. And it brings up a window that actually tells us what the image is. So let's talk about that for a moment. The image size is 11 megabytes. If you were working on the web, you would want to know that it's 2400 by 1600 pixels. So that is right in dimensions.
I remember this.
Yeah. So the width, if it was to be printed at actual size, it would print at 12 inches by 8 inches. In the drop down, you can change those measurements to whatever you want. But I use inches because I'm used to that. But if you were abroad, you could use or in a European country, you could use centimeters. You could use picas if you were a typesetter, et cetera, et cetera. You could use pixels again if you were working on the web. The resolution is 200 pixels per inch. And for me, I consider that the resolution, but some photographers consider the whole dimension of it the resolution. So they would talk about this, the dimensions being, the pixels being the resolution. So it depends on what discipline you're dealing with, what they consider resolution. I like to think of it as 200 pixels per inch because I like to print my paintings. And that gives me the number, DPI, how many pixels would print per inch. And you all know what it should be in order to print. We talked about this, I think, already, but we were working in a vector program before, so there was no resolution. And now, because Photoshop is not a vector program, it's a raster program, rasterizing program. It deals with pixels per inch. So these are actual reality. You're painting the pixels, and you have to remember that. They're only pixels. So it's actually harder to select something that you've selected before and bring it back because you'd have to keep redoing the selection. So I'm going to show you a way of saving your selection.
Oh, yeah.
So you don't have
Yes,
to
I did.
constantly do that.
Okay. Yeah, my last name is zooming.
Oh,
sorry, Chet, C-H-E-N.
Okay, so you do not want to resample. You usually do not want resample on, take it off, because what resample does is either create or throw out pixels. So most of the time, I really think Adobe should have made this the default, not, resample, but sometimes it's on when I actually bring up a document, just as now it was. So you don't want to have that on. You could make a lot of mistakes by resampling instead of just downsizing. When you want to make something smaller, you can put in smaller dimensions and keep the pixels that you originally had. If you have resample on, it may throw out pixels and you will never have them again then. If you throw out pixels, you're giving away pixels in a sense, or throwing them out. So the computer will make things smaller by throwing away pixels, and that is not a good thing. You don't really want to do that. You need to always save your original photos so that you save the original pixels that you have. And if you have to go back to where, to the original document because you managed to destroy parts of it in painting, or you've changed it and you don't like it, then you already have the original. That's a good idea to save your original. A lot of people do adjustments that are not destructive, and they make an adjustment layer for that reason, but we'll be talking about that later. Cool. Okay. So notice something else. The width and height here are constrained to each other. See the really light, can you see that? The light little bracket? That's really
Yeah.
important. Yeah, that's really important too, because if you change one dimension, the other one will change proportionately. So you want that to be on. And most of the time these days, Adobe did figure out that most people want that on. It used to be that sometimes that wasn't on. So people would change one dimension and the other one would not change or whatever, and you would distort your photo. But most of the time you don't want that to happen. So they made the default with it on. In order to get this to change, to be off, you have to click resample. And then you can actually click that constrain command and unconstrain it if you did want to change one dimension without the other changing. But most of the time you want that on, so I uncheck resample and leave that on. And the default is with it on. So now you know where this is, image size. You want, for painting in Photoshop, you generally want the resolution to be fairly high. I downsized this from 300 dpi because it was such a big file on canvas to 200. But this class originally was meant so that you could output as prints and to the web. So in order to output as print, you need it to be 200 and above. The protocol for teachers is to say 300 is the optimum. But I don't know. I think 200 is okay, and it keeps the file size a lot smaller. That makes sense?
Yeah.
If anybody has a question, raise your hand. It's in participants. On your toolbar below, where it says participants, there's a raise hand command. And somebody already found it. I think it was Veronica. Somebody put up a raise hand, and that helps me know that you want to say something, because some of you don't have your webcam on or don't have a webcam. So, or your telephone isn't doing that. So you have to raise your hand and you can talk, okay? So go to that raise hand if you want to say something, unmute yourself and go to the raise hand command. Yeah, are there any questions at this point about that image size box? All right, so here's your photo. Here's our photo. And what we're gonna do, you notice that it's broad daylight. So the light source is probably coming from the top left, or maybe just behind us to the left behind. So you always want to ask yourself, where's the light coming from? And know that when you're painting. I'm going, yes? Okay, I'm going to, Stephanie, I'm going to mute you. You can, yeah. She has her whole family running around. So I'm going to make a selection so that I can change the sky. So the selection tools in Photoshop, here's our toolbar. And I think I can make it so that you see most of it on the screen. If I make it a single arrangement, whoops. So the top tools, these top tools are selection tools. Very important to understand. Then in the middle are painting, or top, I divide it up into quarters. The top quarter are selection tools. The second quarter are painting tools. All the way down to like the dodge tools, that's really a painting tool. And then the lower quarter right here, these tools right here are, I think, vector tools. I think of them as vector tools and type tool, vector tools. And then right here, just manipulating the window, like the hand tool, which enables you to move, you know, the window around if you're in the right view. Whoops. And the zoom tool. Again, Photoshop works as you use colors foreground and background. So this is your foreground box, set foreground color and background color. So that works really well in terms of making masks, and it's the way that they made it so that you could work within the program. So I'll be talking quite a bit about that later, but right now we're just going to use the foreground color when we paint. You can change that with the little arrow right to the top right of the two boxes. So it's totally different than Illustrator, where it's not an object program. It's working with pixels, foreground, background colors. This little box is a quick mask, which I'll be teaching you later. And the box under that is your view, your screen mode. And when in Photoshop, I've had a little problem with the screen mode in that when I have it in a different screen mode, I can move the window around, but when I'm in this normal screen mode, I'll show you, if I click on it, now I can move the window around. So it works better. This mode for me works better. And you can also make it full screen. But the problem with this mode is that you don't have the control, the frame controls. Or maybe I could make it so I do. Application frame. I don't think so. I think I need to be in the other mode. So this is going to make it full screen. Then I have to escape out of that. That's how I get out of it. And I'm back to the mode that I usually have more controls up here showing. Maybe I'll go anyway. So standard mode, there's 3 screen modes. Okay, so I'm going to make some selections and teach you how to save those selections. So remember I said that the selection tools are at the top. So you have here, you have the move tool. You can make a selection and actually move those pixels around of any selection. And it works for a lot of other things too. It's a little bit like a selection tool in Illustrator, but it grabs the pixels and moves them. These are marquee tools, a rectangular, elliptical, single row marquee tool, single column marquee tool. So you can make a rectangular selection. This is the lasso tool, and we used to use it a lot because it's stuck to the edge of shapes. It sticks, it makes selections that sticks to the edge of shapes. But I don't use it quite as much because they invented right below an object selection tool and a quick selection tool. The quick selection tool was the best thing that ever happened because it's an interactive tool and it actually learns as you select. So I will be showing you that right now. The other tool that people still use quite a bit is the magic wand tool, and I'll show you that now too. And then there is a crop tool under that. So the crop tool also, in a sense, makes selections because you can bring in the edge of the document the way you want. And that's very useful. You can also pull a crop. You can go onto the screen and pull it across the screen and make it that way. But recently I've noticed that I mostly just click on it, and then it brings up, you'll see these little handles on the edge of your image, and you can pull in to crop something. Like that would be your crop. So you can make it a different size image if you want, but by using the crop tool. And it does not distort the image, it just crops it. So I'm going to do Command Z. And then when I change tools, it'll ask me if I want to crop, I think, or it didn't this time. But if you've pulled a crop, it will ask you, do you want to crop before you change tools? Okay, so I'm going to do a demo right now of how to work with selections and change the color of selections. And then you can try it on your computers, hopefully. So, yeah. So I'm going to the quick selection. Well, I'll show you first of all how the magic wand works. The magic wand picks an area, and depending on how you, what you put up here with sample size, it will be more or less sensitive to the area that you clicked on. So right now I clicked on this area. I have a 3x3 average and a tolerance of 10. If I make the tolerance bigger, the selection will be less sensitive, but you might want that because you want, let's say I'm trying to select the sky, right? That's what I'm trying to do. Notice, can you see what I've selected? Do you all see on your screen that there's like little marching ants, I call them when they vibrate, selecting an area that looks like a cloud kind of in the sky? That's because it selected all the values that were similar here, and it only went so far. So you can hold shift, remember, write down shift as a plus in a sense. It adds to the selection. So if you hold shift and click, it keeps adding to the selection. Yeah, so I'm getting quite a bit by clicking and clicking with the magic wand. I'm getting almost the selection I want. But right in here, it kind of didn't get it. It's actually probably more efficient to use the quick selection tool. So I'm going to get out of this. The command for deselecting, which you should learn also, you can write this down. I said I would give you a bunch of commands, was Command D or Control D if you're on a PC. So I deselected without saving my selection. And now I'm going to the quick selection tool instead of the magic wand. And the quick selection tool, which is the second one down, not the object selection tool, but that's the one I like the best. And you can, it acts like a brush. So brushes you make bigger or smaller with the brackets. So the forwards bracket makes the brushes bigger. Notice my brush getting bigger, and the backwards one makes it get smaller. Why would we want it bigger? Well, I'm going to try to move it over the area that I want to select, and the computer knows then that you want to select all of this. So I'm going over the area that I want to select, and it immediately understood that I want to select the blue sky. Stephanie, you've already seen this demo, but it's good to see it again, I guess. So I'm doing this generally. Again, there might be areas that your quick selection tool didn't get because it's kind of, it only, notice that when I have the quick selection up, it only goes as far as objects. If there's a boundary established, you might have to add. So I'm going back to my quick selection tool, making my tool a lot smaller with the backwards bracket. And I'm going to shift, hold shift so you add to the selection. I'm just going to push it in here so it understands that I want some of the other blue as well. The other way you could do that is, notice here it didn't get that because the tiny little area inside the arm and the negative space that's created by the body and the arm. So the other way you could do it is to go up to the toolbar. And if you're on the quick selection tool, it'll give you the normal quick selection tool, the plus quick selection tool, and the minus quick selection tool. So you could, you know, toggle around in there and choose one of those. Right now, I don't even have to hold shift. I can just click on that blue space and it adds it to the selection. And I've clicked over here too. Notice that it did not select, it selected too much. It selected the guy's arm also. So what can you do about that? Well, you can go up to the top again, click on the quick selection tool, and you can say minus quick selection. So then you take your little, you made it smaller and you move it around inside that arm, and you're teaching, in a sense, you're saying to the tool, look, I don't want this part, try to remember that. Sometimes it remembers and sometimes it doesn't, but I'm gonna go around and just make sure that everything I want is selected. Command 0 fits it back in the window, and I'm moving around inside my image to make sure that everything that I wanted selected. Sometimes it also selects some of the rocks depending on the tolerance and the number of pixels that you put in when you use the quick selection tool. So the reason I'm showing you this is that you can't really paint in Photoshop without understanding how to select things. So I start with selecting. So the idea is that we're going to make this into a dawn or dusk landscape. We're going to change the lighting. So I have the sky here, and I also want to show you quickly what my screen should look like. So here again, oh my God, this is where I always have trouble. I have my palettes, right? So there's my palettes on the right. I'm working on a laptop. And here are my swatches. So I have swatches just like an Illustrator, and I have color that I can create, and I can change the color options so I can see CMYK. So I'm going to go to my CMYK sliders because I like to work in CMYK. The other things that I always have up when I'm working in Photoshop are layers and history. So yeah. So those of you that are following with me, try to make your screen look like mine. I'm working on layer 0. If your layer 0 says background, you have to double click on it to bring up, to make sure that it's layer 0, because I won't be able to actually work on it unless it's layer 0 and not background layer. At least that's how it used to be. I'm not quite sure now if it's still that way, if they let you work on the background layer, but it used to be that the background layer, when it was called background, was always locked. So how do you lock a layer in Photoshop? Look at the lock is above the first layer. There's a little group of icons here. You don't have the double, and I was talking about that last time when I showed you layers. You don't have the double boxes that you do in Illustrator. You have to lock a layer by going up here. So I just locked it. Now I'm unlocking it. Again, if you're wondering what mode to be in, you should be in Classic, Essentials, or Classic in order to see all the tools that I have. So now we're going to work, we could, if you're worried about the photograph and you want to keep the original photograph, you could make a duplicate layer. So you can go into the drop down and say duplicate layer. And then you can turn off the bottom layer. So you're working on a duplicate layer instead. That might be good for some of you. That's another way to make sure that you don't lose the original photo. So I'm going to put a blend into this area. And I'm going to create it by going to the gradient. The gradient is with the paint bucket. So I see the paint bucket, and I click on that, and the group is gradient tool, paint bucket tool, 3D material drop tool. That's a new one. So all I'm going to do is create a gradient, and when I click on the gradient tool, all my gradients come up here, and you can, in the drop down, it'll show you what type of gradient you're creating. So I want one that goes from color to transparent. So I'm going to pick that, and when you double click, you should bring up a gradient palette where you can pick the color that you want to move. So I clicked in my color palette and it made the original color that I start with to go from color to transparent. It made it violet. And you can save that into the swatches, but in this case, I'm really painting with it. So I'm not so concerned that I actually am going to save it into my swatches. In Illustrator, we save that into the swatches all the time, if you remember. And I'm literally gonna say, I'm not sure that I want to have it at full opacity because I'm not sure how much of this gradient I wanted to put into my selected area. So I'm going to paint with, let's say 50%. So I go up to the top tool, the control bar, and I say 50. Also, I forgot to tell you that you can save the selection. So the area that's being selected, I'm going to paint into. But I'm also concerned that, like, let's say it took me a long time to make a selection. It's very important that you learn how to save your selections. And Stephanie will verify that sometimes it's just really annoying when you've worked and worked and you forgot to save a selection. So go up to select, and at the bottom of select, there's save selection. So it will save it, and it actually saves it into channels, but I'm not going to show you that right now. I'm going to say sky. Okay. So I saved my selection. Okay, I saved it. All right, now, is anybody following me or actually doing it while I'm doing it?
No, I'm not. I don't have Photoshop yet. I'm downloading
here.
it right now.
You're just watching, that's fine.
Yeah.
So it's also being recorded. So I'm gonna
Okay.
stop, somebody remind me to stop the recording the moment I finish this first part of the demo, because I'm gonna give you a break at our normal time, which is 10:15. So, and then I'd like these to be small segments of demo. So I'm going to now pull this gradient into my selected area, and I saved it. If you want to check whether you saved it, you can go to select, and you can load the selection again. You can look at it that way. And in the drop down where it says channel, there should be a selection that says sky. So you can check that you selected it, that you saved it. This is really useful because sometimes you've spent like half an hour trying to and making a good selection, right? And you don't want to lose that. Okay, so now you are going to pull the gradient over that area. So I'm going to pull, and I can actually go into my color and pick other colors as I pull the sky colors. I'm painting basically the pixels. So, okay, I'm gonna paint with that color. Yeah, and then I'm gonna go to a darker color. And I don't like that, so I'm gonna say Command Z. And anyway, you get the idea that I'm painting the pixels. Yeah. You can be, if you like, you can be creative with this. I've gotten some interesting skies for this exercise. So the sky is selected. Now I want to paint the rocks. So how would I do that? I have to make a new selection of the rocks. But I realized that I made a selection of the sky that is everything but the other parts. So I want to paint the guy and the rocks. So I'm going to go to select, inverse. It says no paintings are, it's interesting. I must have deselected. Okay, I'll just load my selection again. So I deselected by mistake. So I'm going to go select, load selection, and I can pick the sky and say, okay. Now I have my sky back again. And go to select, inverse, and it'll actually select everything else. So now I have my man and my rocks. And I'm going to say again, select, save selection. And I'm going to call this man and rocks. And go and paint now. So I'm going to paint. So I'm going to introduce you to the paintbrush tools later, but in order to paint, you have to be on the paintbrush tool. So here's the brush tool, the brush tool in Photoshop. And when you bring up the brush tool, you will see that you get a hard round brush or whatever brush you have just used on your control bar. So I'm going to make this a very soft edged brush, so you can go up and down and take a look at some of the brushes that are preset for you. But right now, what we're concerned with is just a round, hard edged, or a round, a soft edged brush. When I'm going to have you do your little line drawings on the bottom layer, just as on top of the photo, you're going to make 2 layers and lock the first one when you start using your photo. You're going to do the line drawing with a tiny hard-edged brush, round brush. So here's the round brushes that come up. I'm going to choose a soft one for what I want to do, and I can even make it softer if I want. And actually, I guess it was as soft as it was going to get, and I can make it bigger. So I'm going to make it bigger and take a look at it. I can also use the brackets, the forward bracket, to make it bigger. And I'm going to paint onto these rocks. I'm not getting, come on, oh. So I'm making it bigger. And when you paint, in this case, go into normal and change the mode to multiply, because I will be talking about modes later, and I'm going to put a handout on modes that you should actually memorize. But multiply lets the textures show through. It's a really good mode for when you want textures to actually show through. So it applies color in proportion to the texture underneath. Does that make sense? So it's a great mode. A lot of people ask me about this in that sense. So I'm going to paint onto it. Again, I'm not going to have my painting be at full opacity, because even though I'm letting the texture show through, I still want to be a lot in control, or very much in control, of how the color goes on these rocks. So I'm going to select colors from my color. And what I did was, this palette moves up and down. If you pull down on the bottom of the palette, it's the color palette, you get this whole rainbow color selection. So we're trying to make this look like dusk. So I'm going to go to a violet color, and I'll just start painting. And make sure that it's in multiply, and make sure that you're not using it at a very high opacity. And you can put some nice like pinks in if you like. You know how when you look up and you're driving along the 210 and you look up and it's all violet? That's what we're doing here. And the guy gets darker and darker. I want the guy. Oop, I don't like that, so I'm going to go backwards. The other thing in Photoshop is that you have a history palette, and it'll enable you to go backwards to specific steps. So I'm going to keep painting. If I go backwards to here, maybe I like that better. So you can go backwards, but the moment you start painting again, you've destroyed all the other steps that were ahead of where you went back to. So remember that, all of these disappear. If you've done something after where you go back to, you're gonna lose that. A lot of people don't get that right away. So now I'm using sort of that violet color again, and I'm going over the rocks, and yeah, maybe a little bit more blue. Cool. I'm using my mouse, so you don't all have to have a Wacom tablet, although if you're going to be painting with me for the rest of the class, you might want to get a less expensive Wacom tablet to put in your computer. I know some of you were talking about doing that. The school is not giving them to you, so you may have to buy one for that. I mean, I really don't know how you're going to paint in Photoshop if you don't have some kind of, you know, pen and tablet. You can do it with your mouse. I just did this with my mouse. From now on, when I teach you painting, I'm going to have my Wacom tablet hooked up to my computer.